Good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name is Dr. Eliana Ramirez. I am the director of the Crisis and Recovery Enhancement Care TA Center. I am thrilled that you're here to join us today with our partner, NAMI California. We will be co-facilitating a presentation on ethics, HIPAA, and professional boundaries. We are the Care Crisis and Recovery Enhancement TA Center. We are funded by the California Department of Healthcare Services and administered by the Center for Applied Research Solutions, CARS. We are grateful for the funding that we have from the Department of Healthcare Services. And what we're about to say here today may or may not represent our funder or the agency that I work at, CARS. But we are thrilled that you're here with us today. And that is our typical disclaimer, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. So it's 2021. And as we've all gone into increasing number of Zoom meetings and other virtual platforms, it's always important for us to consider security issues. So we don't anticipate any challenges, but if there were to be a security issue, we do want to let you know that we will immediately close this virtual meeting space. And we will send you an email with an update of what will happen next. If possible, we will reopen up the space to continue on with our presentation, but we do want to just give you a heads up ahead of time that if suddenly the space were to close down, please do look to your email for follow-up directions. So what is the Care TA Center? As I mentioned, we're the Crisis and Recovery Enhancement TA Center. That means we provide training and technical assistance regarding the crisis continuum of care and justice diversion, specifically in the state of California, though we welcome our folks from all over the place, from Austin, Texas, Kansas, wherever you might be joining us from. We're funded through the Mental Health Services Act to provide training and technical assistance to the behavioral health county programs. That's 58 across the state of California and a couple of cities as well that receive MHSA funding. We really focus on evidence-based practices and culturally responsive practices. And we're interested in helping counties to engage in work that is constantly looking at data, outcomes data to improve services, especially for communities that have been historically marginalized and or underserved. We're very fortunate to work in a very robust collaboration. We are partnered with some of the thought leaders in crisis continuum of care and justice diversion in the state of California. Our partners include Recovery International. You might know them also as RI International. And then, of course, our wonderful partners at today's presentation, NAMI, the National Association of Mental Illness California chapter. We also partner with C4 Innovations, the Research and Action Center at Impact Justice, and Stanford Sierra Youth and Families. So our audiences, you might be familiar with this model if you've worked with SAMHSA at all, but we use a three-tiered approach that is universal training and technical assistance. This is really focusing at state-level mental health providers, but also providers across the United States. And the universal services are things like our website and presentations like this that anyone can join. Then we look and work with targeted training and technical assistance. And these are those 59 counties and cities that are MHSA funded that I mentioned. And folks can go to our website and submit a TA request form. And then we might be doing some intensive work with your counties or agencies. And so this might be through coaching, or you might ask us to come in and do a training that's specific to your staff. We provide a variety of services. First and foremost are these virtual learning events. So like today's session, I'm very excited to share with you that NAMI California has done a series of trainings for us, and we've got a couple more that are coming up as well. We also provide tools and resources on our website, such as a resource library where you can go in and search by topic that relate to the crisis continuum of care and justice diversion. We provide an asset map. This is something we're very excited about, hot off the presses. If you were to think about your county in California and wonder, well, does my county have a mobile crisis unit? Or is there a brief psychiatric stabilization unit? Do we have a crisis line or a warm line that's local? You could go to this asset map and enter the zip code of the county that you work and live in and immediately pull up those resources. As I mentioned previously, we do individual coaching through our TA process. You might also be interested on June 16th and 17th. We're having our very first annual conference. This is going to be a virtual event focusing on diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism in the crisis continuum of care. So this is titled Listening, Learning, and Leading Anti-Racism in the Crisis Continuum of Care. We hope you'll join us for that. The way to stay informed about upcoming trainings and our annual conference is to engage in our newsletter. Again, if you were to go to our website, you could sign up for our newsletter, which is sent out on a quarterly basis. So as I mentioned, our role really is to focus on evidence-based practices, culturally responsive practices, and how to use outcomes data to provide the best quality care that we can for the crisis continuum of care and justice diversion. And you might think, well, what does this mean actually? Well, we know from research at this point that when we are able to provide training, support for crises that happen, behavioral health crises in the community, that we have the best outcomes for people who are experiencing behavioral health crises. So whether it is somebody who is in such pain that they are having a suicidal crisis, or whether they're having an overdose crisis, or perhaps there's violence in the family. When we're able to provide support and services in the community, we have better health outcomes. And so we would only want to go to an emergency room if there was a medical need to go there. And we certainly would want to avoid jails and prisons whenever we can, because behavioral health crises interventions are not as effective in those spaces. If you think about it, if you've ever been to an emergency room, there's a lot going on. There are crises left and right. That's not exactly the place where people can kind of calm down and develop coping strategies to get through whatever the challenge or crisis is that they're facing. So that's where we're pulling up our evidence-based practices and really looking at the mental health continuum of care. So today, talking about ethics, HIPAA, and professional boundaries. If you happen to have joined our mobile crisis outreach team's training yesterday, you will recall that HIPAA, boundaries, and ethics are central to any kind of crisis continuum of care work that we're doing. It's true across all behavioral health situations, but especially when we think about the crisis continuum of care. And so we're very fortunate that NAMI is here with Angela Brand, who is going to be the main presenter for today's slides, to talk about ethics, HIPAA, and professional boundaries for all providers, but with a special focus on family and peer specialists, because we know that our family and peer specialists and people with lived experience play a very distinct role in crisis continuum of care. Just off the bat, when somebody's in crisis, to be able to talk to somebody who has some lived experience, who can say, I've been there, there's a reason to have hope. I was able to get through it. You can get through it too. That takes effect immediately with rapport. That's something you can't teach in school, and you can't learn it from a book. Lived experience is something distinct, and it doesn't have side effects like many medications, and it can take effect immediately, whereas there are many medications that will take a little bit longer to take effect. So we really are lucky to think about in California the role of peer specialists and family members and people with lived experience in that crisis continuum of care. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the virtual mic over to co-facilitator Angela to introduce herself. Then I'll share a little bit about my professional background, and then we're excited to hear from you all with a couple of polling questions. So Angela, welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Eliana, for getting us started today. My name is Angela Brand. I am with NAMI California. I lead our strategic engagement efforts, which is just a really fancy way of saying I oversee our training and education, our advocacy, and our community engagement activities. So I have my hand in a lot of different areas. And for those of you, I see folks that had introduced themselves in the chat. I see a lot of our NAMI family folks from around the state. So hello to all of you, and welcome to everyone else. I'm really excited to be here with you today and present this information. It is a lot, but it is a really critical component of the work that we do. And so I'm just happy to be here today.
So, and I'm going to be in the background here providing examples with the different slides that relate to practice. So prior to becoming director of the CARE TA Center, I was a licensed social worker for many years in the community, having worked with a variety of populations, oftentimes around crisis care. So I've worked with veterans, I've worked with LGBTQ veterans and LGBTQ people in the community, and a number of communities of color, including the Tanakh Nation in Southwestern Arizona. I've worked quite a bit with Latinx communities and Black African-American communities as well as Samoan communities down in the Los Angeles and Long Beach area. My background in crisis continuum of care services is oftentimes around suicide prevention, overdose prevention, and suicide and overdose postvention as well. And so many of the examples that I'll be sharing with you are from that experience. In addition, I also have lived experience as somebody who has grappled with mental health challenges myself at different times. And I'm also a family member of somebody who is living with what's considered to be a severe and persistent mental health issue, who has currently at this point in their life has a conservator. And so as a family member, have also worked as an advocate for my beloved family member. So I'll be sharing from those three perspectives as well today. I think we might have some polling questions now that we will be able to bring up to hear a little bit about who you are in the audience. The first question is, please select your professional role. And you might have several of these. Just choose the one that is most prominent for you in your own professional identity. Are you a family member of a person with lived experience? Perhaps you identify as a peer or a person with lived experience. Maybe you are a social worker, a counselor, marriage and family therapist, addiction counselor, psychologist, or maybe you have another professional identity. If you were to select other, would you please enter that other identity into our chat box as well? Wonderful. Sophia says that they are a housing navigator. Outstanding. Thank you. I see Max, who is a quality improvement supervisor for behavioral health. Fabulous. This is great. We know that housing and administrative leadership positions are all critical to crisis continuum of care. Quality assurance specialist from Desireen, welcome, outstanding. NAMI executive director, fabulous. We've got PSH developer, administrative contractors for our supportive PSH services, fabulous. And let's see, Ayana, are people also entering these into the poll? We've got case managers here. Terrific. So many different roles. How interesting, everybody. Wow. Okay. So we so far have got about 20 people who identify as peers or persons with lived experience, followed by 17% of social workers. And then we've got tie between family members of people with lived experience, as well as people who identify as addiction counselors. And then the vast majority are folks who identify as something else. So I see here more answers that are coming into the chat box. This is terrific. Welcome to all of you. This is so exciting and really hope inspiring for me that we've got so many different professional experiences in the audience here today. So the next question is, what is your level of familiarity with HIPAA? And there's no right or wrong answers, and this is anonymous. So feel free to answer whatever is the most true for you. Your choices are not at all familiar with HIPAA, somewhat familiar with HIPAA, or very familiar with HIPAA. So what is your level of familiarity with HIPAA? Again, there is no right or wrong answer. Just helps us to know a little bit about how much information to share when we get to that part of the presentation. Okay, so we've got 55% who've said they're very familiar with HIPAA, 42% somewhat familiar with HIPAA, and 3% not at all familiar with HIPAA. Outstanding. Thank you so much. So the next question is, to what extent have you experienced ethical challenges in your professional work with clients, colleagues, or others? And that other category might include insurance agencies or law enforcement or pretty much any other agency or group that you might work with. Your choices are, I have never experienced an ethical challenge at work, or I have experienced some ethical challenges at work, or perhaps you've experienced several or a lot of ethical challenges at work. And you might be sitting here going, well, Ramirez, what do you mean by ethical challenges? And we will get into that as well. But just off the bat, just trying to get a sense of what your experiences might be. And we acknowledge that people who have been working in behavioral health for decades will have had more opportunities to run into potential ethical challenges versus somebody who might be newer to their career. And our answer is outstanding. Okay, so we've got the majority of people at 71% having said that they've experienced some ethical challenges at work, followed by 18% who've said they've never experienced ethical challenges, and 11% have experienced several or a lot of ethical challenges. Thank you so much. I think we might be on to our last polling question here. To what extent have you experienced professional boundary challenges with clients, colleagues, or others? And again, it might be insurance or law enforcement. So professional boundary challenges, these in short might be things around where your role stops and starts as a professional. be it as a family or peer support person, be it in terms of a social worker or psychologist or addiction counselor. Professional boundaries are challenges that interact with your particular role in engaging with the person or the system. So to what extent have you experienced professional boundary challenges? Choices can be, I have never experienced a professional boundary challenge. I have experienced some professional boundary challenges, or I've experienced several or a lot of professional boundary challenges. Again, no right or wrong answers. This is just where we're at. Okay, so 63% have experienced some professional boundary challenges, followed by 23% who said I've never experienced a professional boundary challenge, and 13% have a lot of experience, a lot of professional boundary challenges. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you answering those questions for us. We welcome you throughout the course of this presentation to put your questions into the chat box and put in examples. Maybe as we're talking about HIPAA, you remember that one situation with HIPAA or that one professional boundary challenge. We welcome you to put that into the chat box as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hand that virtual mic back over to Angela.
So as I said before, I do recognize a lot of folks in the room today as part of our extended NAMI family. And so for those of you who might be new to NAMI, learning about a little bit what we do, we are the statewide affiliate for the National Alliance on Mental Illness. We work at federal, state, and local level, working to support individuals and the family members that care for them. So we do a lot of work around advocacy, legislation, policy development, education, training, community engagement, and we work on behalf of the 58 local affiliates that we have that span the entire state of California. And we do a lot of work like this with our partners at the CARE TA Center, as well as other state and community-based organizations to provide support to meet families and individuals where they're at. Today, the work that we're going to be reviewing might be review for some of you, as it looks like some of you are very familiar with HIPAA and working in the peer support field. I will say that the material that we're going to present today is part of the work that we do for our family and peer support specialist efforts. And so, again, as Eliana mentioned, any questions or thoughts that you have, experiences that you want to share or disclose, to really help the context of the conversation, we're excited to do that. And I will be bouncing back and forth between some of the material that we have and some of the real world, real life examples that Eliana has offered to share with us as well from her extensive background. So when we talk about code of ethics, we talk about a few things: integrity, safety, and professional responsibility. And then with that, what we'll talk about a little bit today is some of the real life considerations. So this, just full disclaimer for those of you that this is kind of your first foray into a training like this, when we talk about HIPAA, it's very content rich. There's a lot of information. It's going to be a little bit dense. And so one of the things I will say is that our contact information is provided at the end for those of you that have additional questions or, want clarifications on things. Please know that you can reach out. We'll be providing some resources for you as, part of the stuff that SAMHSA provides. But just know that it's a lot of information. And for those of you that this is, like I said, your first for it, don't feel that you have to take it all in. If you have any questions along the way, please drop them into the chat and we'll really try to make this as fun as we can with something that, has a lot of content. So we do use a polling feature called Menti. So you would go to menti.com. You can do it on a separate tab in your browser. You can do it on a smartphone. Menti is an anonymous platform for polling. It doesn't ask for any personal information. It doesn't require you to download an app, and we'll have some prompts there. They will ask for a code, so we'll put that into the chat box. It is 37155549, and that'll get you into our specific polling queue. And so we ask, what might some of the differences in the code of ethics be between peer specialists and others that are working in the mental or behavioral health field as professionals? So there's the slide there. You can go ahead and answer right straight through Menti. Those responses will start to populate on the screen so we can see what folks have to say. If you'd like, if you don't want to use the Menti app, you can also put those into the chat box. So let's think about that. Some of the distinctions that you might see between those working as peer and family support specialists. So here we go. So using personal experience, absolutely. So really, as we get into that, you'll see that, there's a lot that, working as a peer and family specialist, brings into any professional arena. And so looking at, how we talk to folks, how we work with folks, how we help them navigate the systems or the structures that they're within. And a lot of great responses popping up here. And I think that, some of the commonalities within these responses are really about using our personal and lived experience. I know Eliana disclosed her relationship. I also identify as a family member, as the parent of a child who has had mental health struggles her whole life, the daughter, the sister. And so when we think about our role in this space, how valuable it is to reach out to someone who knows what you're going through and how to navigate that system and really being that link on that personal level. So I see a lot of those here. And there's a lot of commonalities as well. I mean, thinking about ethics and confidentiality, those are the things that, should be upheld throughout. But thinking about our personal experiences, our lived experience, leading with recovery and resiliency. And so one of the things that we'll share, and I'm not sure if it's in the chat already, but we've popped into there, it's the peer support national practice guidelines that are provided by SAMHSA. And that really helps us think about, the ways where being a peer and family support specialist can be different. So, we come to this because this is a personal passion. So it's a voluntary space for us. We're hopeful and open-minded. We bring empathy and respect. We look to facilitate change in the system, moving out of that sort of medically driven, prescribed model to something that is really rooted in the client and family driven system of care. Peer support is honest and direct. We look for mutual sharing power, but empowering those that are driving their own care, looking at strengths and focusing on that, but being transparent. And really at the heart of this, it's just being able to help someone in that space so that we are empowering them and we are giving them the tools to succeed and be who they are in that space, meeting them where they're at. And not to say that those who work in the healthcare field or mental and behavioral health don't have those qualities or don't have those considerations or characteristics, but it's definitely something that as peer and family support specialists, we bring that to the table as a strength. So the next couple of slides, there's going to be a lot of stuff. And so really, when we look at this, we look at the principles of person-centered integrity. And so you'll see on the screen, these different categories. So we have recovery and resilience, which is really just the consumer-driven approach and the peer-to-peer mutual learning principles that in everyday interactions that we have with peers and family members. We talk about decision-making and accountability and how we can promote peer and family members' ethical decision-making and their personal responsibility consistent with their culture, their values, and their beliefs. Values and planning, promote articulation of the peer and family members' unique values in planning and evaluating their behavioral or mental health related issues. Needs, strengths, and goals. So teaching, mentoring, coaching, and supporting family members and peers to articulate their goals that reflect what they need and their strengths. Respect for cultural values, communicating information that's both developmentally and culturally appropriate. Appropriate communication. We have empowerment. We have, looking at when we're assisting someone, how do they make decisions? How do they understand what the implication of those decisions are? How are we giving them the information so that it's not just us taking them through and telling them what to do, but we're building their capacity to be able to do that on their own throughout the process. We're looking at professional standards, maintaining those standards of being professional, competent, and keeping our integrity as we do so. Looking at the last column here, we have non-discrimination. So abstaining from discriminating against anyone or refusing services to someone on the basis of race, ethnicity, gender identity, religion, spirituality, culture, national origin, age, sexual orientation, marital status, language preference, socioeconomic status, or disability. Acknowledging competency. So assisting peers and family members whose concerns are within your competency as determined by your education, training, and experience, as well as your ongoing supervision and consultation with your team. Looking at financial independence. So in this respect, we say financial independence refers to abstaining from maintaining a relationship for the sole purpose of financial gain. So not doing anything where you would, accept money or provide funds for someone who, does a referral to you or things like that. So, and then appropriate termination, the final one. I'm looking at, when a relationship becomes clear that the family or peer support specialist relationship is no longer appropriate or the desire of that individual or family member. Okay, so principles of safety. Regardless of, any profession that we're at, our safety is always paramount. But really in this space, when we talk about that, it's being aware of your surroundings, attending to the safety of yourself and your agency, and looking at your interactions with others, being cautious in answering questions, making sure that whatever you're doing and the interactions that you have, how are you keeping yourself safe and protected? So we talk a little bit about these pieces here. So mandatory reporting is complying with the laws and regulations that involve mandatory reporting of harm, abuse, neglect, making every effort to involve peers and family members, in the planning for services, but to ensure that no further harm is done to them as the result of the reporting. So when we talk about mandated reporting, sometimes it's agency specific. We talk about mandated reporters. An example that we often use when we give this training is that, family to family instructors, or those that lead programs for NAMI, are considered mandated reporters, so that if something happens and they are aware of a dangerous situation, they are required to report that. And sometimes that can be a really difficult conversation to have or a disclosure to make, but when doing that, it really is because we're looking at the best interest of the individual or family member and making sure that we aren't, contributing to any further harm or dangerous situations. And so this is something that's required. It's a legal requirement. Often it's sort of out of our hands. It's just part of the practice of keeping ourselves and others safe. Our professional role is, looking at what are the rights, the roles, expectations, and benefits and limitations of family and peer support processes. Role clarification, looking at avoiding ambiguity in the relationship with peers and family members, ensuring that those boundaries are in place so that they see you in that role as helping them navigate the system and the circumstance. Laws, self-explanatory, complying with all laws and regulations applicable to where services are being provided, including confidentiality. Confidentiality is maintaining confidentiality in personal and professional communications, ensuring that family members and peers have authorized use and release of any and all information about themselves or their loved ones for whom they have legal authority, including but not limited to verbal statements, writings, or re-release of documents. Privacy rights, respecting the privacy of the agencies with whom you're working with, and not distributing any internal or draft documents or sharing private internal conversations. Positive focus, maintaining positive relationships with peers and family members, refraining from any premature or unannounced ceasing of relationships until a reasonable alternate arrangement is made for continuation of similar support services. Boundaries, abstaining from engaging in any intimate, emotional, or physical relationships with peers or family members that are engaged in support relationships. We often talk about, making sure that those boundaries are in place so that things don't become too intense or too personal, or again, puts you or them in any sort of unsafe situation. Gifts or payments, again, that's not accepting any gifts related to professional services, including but not limiting to bartering services, payment for referrals, or any other remunerations. When we give this training in other settings, we talk about things like token gifts. Someone bakes you cookies and you bring that into the office to share. Those types of things are okay. But if you have kind of a quid pro quo where it's you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, really looking at not accepting those types of gifts and payments, as part of the services that you're providing or you're referred to provide. And then financial transactions. So abstaining from engaging in any personal financial transactions with peers or family members that you're working in a support relationship with. So just any and all sort of financial pieces are kind of off the table and not to be considered. So professional responsibility, we've touched on this a lot, and it's important to ensure that, in any space, we're professional, we're responsible, we maintain clear communications and boundaries. We look at that as, just part of anything that we do, but specifically around this, we talk about core competency. And so, but the core competencies are the things that help you build the capacity to perform in your role or your function. And so There are clusters of knowledge, skills, and attitudes that you would need in order to be successful on the job and having the ability to integrate the necessary knowledge, skills, and attitudes as part of your work. So training, mentoring, supervision, all of these things really help develop the competencies that you would need in any role that you have. And so specifically in this space, we talk about recovery-oriented. Peer and family support workers hold out hope to those that they serve, partnering with them to envision and achieve a meaningful and purposeful life. Peer support workers help those that they serve identify and build on their strengths and empower them to choose for themselves, recognizing that there are multiple pathways to recovery. Person-centered. Peer recovery support services are always directed by the person participating in services. Peer recovery support is personalized to align with the specific hopes, goals, and preferences of the individuals served and to respond to specific needs that the individual has identified to the peer worker. They are voluntary. Peer workers are partners or consultants to those that they serve. They do not dictate the types of services provided or elements of the recovery plans that will guide their work. Participation in peer recovery support services is always contingent on peer and family choice. Relationship focused. The relationship between the peer worker and the peer is the foundation on which recovery support services and support are provided. The relationship between the peer worker and the peer is respectful, trusting, empathetic, collaborative, and mutual. And lastly, trauma-informed. Peer recovery support utilizes a strengths-based framework that emphasizes physical, psychological, and emotional safety and creates opportunities for survivors to build a sense of control and empowerment. So I have talked a lot, and I know that we've gone through a lot of different, pieces to how this all comes together, the different considerations. I wanted to take a moment and offer some time to chat with you, Eliana, about any of these areas and considerations and thinking about some of the real world or practical considerations that have come up in your experience related to any of these components.
Sure, I'd be happy to share. And I really appreciate everyone who are putting comments into the chat box as well. Anna Nunez said that your employment policies may differ from core competencies. Oh my gosh, Anna, that was absolutely my experience as a social worker working at the Veterans Affairs with a transgender service member who was on leave from the military. This is when transgender people were prohibited from serving in the US military. And this veteran was accessing the VA for medical care that was not available in the military. So this veteran was home from Fallujah and was getting some medical care at the VA, and they had a psychiatric emergency. This person had a suicidal crisis. And I had to be very careful as an LGBT veteran care coordinator to make sure that I was considering what I was putting in the person's VA medical chart. Because if I identified this person as transgender, when they went back into the military service, since the military could access the VA medical charts, that could have outed the person and they could have lost their job in the military. So to your point, Anna, my professional code of ethics as a social worker really prioritizes things like confidentiality and respect for diversity and self-determination of clients. And the VA had a very specific charting policy in place. And so my professional responsibility was really heightened in that moment to figure out, is it necessary for me to identify this service member's transgender identity in the charting that I was about to do, knowing that the military would have access to the VA medical chart, and how that could implicate the transgender service members' ability to continue in their military service. And I see Anna saying here, do no harm. Absolutely, Anna, that is such an excellent point. And I saw that Victoria also put in their trauma-informed care approach always helps. And Victoria said, Angela, you're right on the money. This is exactly what I do to help to keep myself up to date and informed. So with that acknowledgement that, Angela, the things that you're sharing are really resonating with several people in the audience. Thank you so much. And I'll turn the mic back over to you.
So here we have, kind of 4 components. Stay informed, which is really just, staying up to date with, the latest research, policy, and developments of peer and family support work, emotional development, behavioral development, substance use treatment, mental and behavioral health. Really just staying informed and staying up to date really helps you kind of keep your finger on the pulse of this work. And as we know, things change. A lot of research is being done all of the time. We know in the light of the last year with COVID-19 and the pandemic that, there's been so much more information and research that's coming out about how that's impacting children and youth and families and individuals. And so staying on top of those things really helps you kind of be at the forefront to know, where the field is going and what the recommendations look like. Skill building and scope of work, or SOW, engaging in helping relationships that include skill building, not exceeding your scope of practice, experience, training, education, or competence. Appropriate competence. So performing and holding yourself out as competent to perform only peer and family services, but not moving beyond what you've secured in your own education, training, or experience. And then personal problem solving. So looking at seeking appropriate professional supervision or consultation or any kind of assistance that's going to help you with your personal problems or conflicts that might impair or affect your work performance or judgment. Again, staying with personal responsibility, see something, say something. So if you have reason to believe that another peer or family support provider or anyone in your cohort is engaging in conduct that violates the law or the code, you can file a complaint with the Certification Commission for Peer and Family Support. Making a complaint to the commission is an additional requirement. It's not a substitute or an alternate to any duty or filing of report that's required by statute or regulation. And again, I think to the point that, a lot of agencies and entities will have, their own policies and procedures. So, know what your agency's requirements are around that as well. So the next one is stay right-sized. So refraining from any sort of distortion, misusing, or misrepresentation of your experience, knowledge, skills, or research findings. And zero exploitation, which is, again, refraining from financially or professionally exploiting a colleague, representing a colleague's work, or anything around what someone else might be doing, representing it as your own. And then the final piece here on professional responsibility is quality supervision support. So in the role of a supervisor, being responsible for maintaining the quality of consultation skills, obtaining supervision consultation for work, really just making sure that you have the right supports around you to do your job to the best of your ability. Research and regulations. So in the role of a researcher, being aware of and complying with federal and state laws and regulations, your agency regulations, and all professional standards that govern the conduct of research, including but not limited to ensuring the participants' complete informed consent for participation in a study, or if they decline to participate in a study. And then credit where credit is due. So in the role as a volunteer, an employee in your organization, always giving credit to the persons or individuals that were publishing or having unpublished original ideas, taking reasonable precautions to ensure that employers or affiliate organizations promote and advertise materials correctly and factually. Why are the 3 principles of integrity, safety, and professionalism chosen to represent a code of ethics? We've got some good answers coming in here. Absolutely. I think, as we've already discussed, keeping folks safe, protecting yourself and your agency, to avoid harm, do no harm. These are great answers.
Angela, if I might, I think about working with communities of color and LGBTQ communities and communities who are neurodivergent, how important it is, especially when we come at this work from an anti-racist perspective, anti-homophobia perspective, that these integrity, safety, and professionalism also help to protect communities who have historically been marginalized.
Absolutely. That's a great point. Yes. So when we look at, when you accept employment as a peer or family support specialist, you do have a responsibility to adhere to certain codes of conduct and agency policies. It is the responsibility of folks to know what those are. Look at your employee manual. In addition to the policies, understanding the workplace expectations and requirements, know what their policy is on cultural competency, and knowing that it's all hands on deck when it comes to policy and procedure. So when you know what your role is, you know what the rules of conduct are, and everyone is on that same page with that expectation, everyone is working toward the same goal. So the purpose of these rules aren't to restrict your rights, but really rather that you know what conduct is expected and what is necessary. So we talk about HIPAA, and that stands for the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. So HIPAA, established in 1996, is a law designed to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the nation's healthcare system. And it's divided into two parts. Title I is healthcare access, portability, and renewability, protecting health insurance coverage when someone loses or changes their job, addresses issues such as pre-existing conditions. And Title II is the administrative simplification. So it includes provisions for the privacy and security of health information, specifies electronic standards for the transmission of health information, and requires unique identifiers for providers. It's the HIPAA regulations apply to covered entities and business associates defined as health plans, healthcare clearinghouses, and healthcare providers who conduct certain electronic transactions. And so when we look at that, we see, the ability to transfer and continue health insurance when you move from one job to another, or if you lose your job. And it's designed to reduce healthcare fraud and abuse, and it has industry-wide standards for how all of our information is stored, protected, and handled in-house and between carriers and providers. So within HIPAA, we talk about client rights. And so it's informed consent, receiving notice of privacy practices when you're admitted to a program or facility, receiving access to your medical record and copyrights for protected health information upon written request amendment or correction of protected health information, request an accounting of disclosures, accept disclosures for treatment payment options, request restrictions and use of protected health information, request alternate communication methods, and making sure that the appropriate entity is aware when an agency violates rights if you have not received resolution going within the agency. So this is where the material gets really, really dense. It's really sort of black and white, kind of outline what the laws and regulations are. So we move into privacy requirements, and it's pretty straightforward. So providing information to clients regarding their privacy rights, having clear privacy policies and procedures, and training your employees and staff to maintain training documentation, designating a privacy official and a security officer to ensure privacy policies are adopted and followed, and ensuring that all client records that contain identifiable information is secure to prevent access to those who don't need it. So again, with HIPAA, it's protection and confidential handling of health information. This gives folks more control over their own medical or health information. It establishes boundaries on the use and disclosure of their health or medical records and creates safeguards to protect their privacy. It does provide accountability with criminal penalties for violators, and it creates a balance between privacy and the good of the general public. HIPAA requires that healthcare providers, organizations, and business associates develop and follow procedures ensuring the confidentiality and security of protected health information, or PHI, when it is transferred, received, handled, or shared. This applies to all forms of protected health information, paper, oral, electronic, etc. Only the minimum health information necessary to conduct business is to be used or to be shared. So we also have health information technology for economic and clinical health, or HITECH, because in mental health and behavioral health, we know we love our acronyms. So HITECH is an extension of HIPAA legislation, resulting in the expansion and the exchange of electronic protected health information, or EPHI. It widened the scope of privacy and security protections under HIPAA, increases legal liability for non-compliance, and has more enforcement actions. Historically, HIPAA was not well enforced, but the adoption of some final rules in 2013 did clarify and strengthen enforcement activities. So both covered entities and business associates are subject to penalties for HIPAA violations. There's financial penalties that are involved for willful neglect. And even though an individual can't bring a case of action against a provider for violations of HITECH, the state attorney general can on behalf of the state's residents. The Department of Health and Human Services is required to conduct periodic audits of covered entities and business associates. There's information there on breach notification requests, health record access. So for providers that have implemented an EHR system, which is an electronic health record, individuals have a right to obtain their personal health information in electronic form. you have the right to request your information through this way, and they can't charge you exorbitant fees for it. So there are some provisions that go through business associates having to comply with, different security and HIPAA violations. There's a lot of information on this. It's really kind of dry, and I won't get into too much of it just thinking about our time, but there's a lot of rules and regulations around HIPAA and high tech. And there's also a lot of penalties for folks who violate and breach these. And so there's a lot of things that in your space is really recommended that folks are trained on HIPAA and violations of HIPAA, because there's a lot of penalties, a lot of things that can happen if it's violated. So this is information that we can provide to everyone after. I don't want to go too far into the weeds because it's a ton. So this information is on what constitutes a medical record. It's pretty straightforward. Name, social security number, medical record number, your address, email address, a telephone number, a fax number, birth date, name of relatives or relative, spouse, children, things like that, full face photographic images, vehicle identifiers, etc. So it's any kind of information about you. And so it's whatever could identify you in any way. And so relating to, past, present, future, and it can be shared either verbally, on paper, or through electronic records. So it is important to know that information can be shared within an agency on a need to know basis. And so it's information that you might share about your client with your supervisor or a team member who is also associated with the client. That kind of information can be shared. But some of the things that you need to know here are: do not disclose the entire record except to other providers for treatment after the intent to treatment is verified. You want to review each of the requests on an individual basis. Know that a client can revoke their permission at any time, and always follow standard protocols of the agency with which you work. So PHI sharing, so again, that's public health information. Information cannot be shared outside of an agency, but PHI sharing is permitted if there's disclosure for healthcare operations, there's a regulatory mandate, or that mandated reporting we talked about a little bit earlier, or in the instance of carrying out treatment, payment, and healthcare operations. Is there anything that you needed or wanted to add to that, Eliana? Any of the sort of regulatory pieces? Any thoughts that you had on that?
I just really like the way that NAMI has talked about, when we think about mandated reporting, wherever possible, to invite the person, whether it's a youth or adult, if we need to make a mandated report, to let them know that we need to make that report and invite them to participate in it with us, because that increases their sense of agency and autonomy. And that's a trauma-informed way of being. And that the final piece of that is that whenever we work with someone, from the get-go, we let them know that we're mandated reporters and what that means, so that they can know if they're going to share something with us that we might have to report, that would be expected.
Thank you. So who must follow HIPAA? It's healthcare providers, business associates, health plans, healthcare clearinghouses, people that receive or send billing information, anyone that's involved in any kind of arena where there is personal health information that one person has about another person. Everyone involved in that has to follow HIPAA. So again, as I said, there are a lot of considerations for what happens if someone violates HIPAA. And so if you don't protect HIPAA information, there's a lot of things that can happen. There's monetary fines, employment termination. In some cases, folks can go to jail or prison or be under house arrest. And so the definition of the violation of compliance is use, access, disclosure of protected health information in a manner that's not permitted under HIPAA unless the covered entity or business associate demonstrates that there is low probability that PHI has been compromised based on a risk assessment of fact. That's a lot of information. And so thinking about what could happen is categories of violation. So those include things that occur without the person's knowledge, that would have had reasonable cause, that are not due to willful neglect, but that are corrected quickly, or due to willful neglect that are not corrected. Monetary penalties vary by the type of violation and can range from $100 per violation up to, in some cases, $25,000 to $50,000 per violation. And so there's different tiers that we have outlined here. But really, it's, there's considerable things that can happen, of which, losing your job, going to jail, monetary fines. There's a lot that can happen depending on, those tiers. So I think the next slide actually gets into the tiers, so I won't go into that too much. So tier A is violations where the offender didn't realize that they had violated HIPAA. So that's where you see things like, the $100 fine per violation. Tier B is where there are violations due to reasonable cause, but not willful neglect. So you have an escalation in the fine violation, and you can see here there's yearly maximums associated with it. But really, this is just to demonstrate sort of the different ways in which HIPAA can be violated, either purposefully or not. And so we get into tier C, which is violations that are due to willful neglect that the organization ultimately corrected. So putting your systems in place, but not safeguarding them, or having, something happen where someone's information is released, but that the organization or entity responsible comes in quickly and, makes amends, sends out notices, does the things that they need to do. There's still violations and fines involved, but that would be, recognition of the organization that information got out. And then tier D, that's violations of willful neglect that the organization did not correct. And so that's where information was willingly released, information was shared, and there were no steps taken to correct what happened. The agency did not pull back, and do any kind of proactive or reactive measures. And so this one is where you're going to see the highest level of fines associated with it. There is maximum penalties for jail and prison time, and you can find the folks that work in those agencies can be held criminally liable for what happened. And I think there's some information we can share after that links to these different tiers, because the pieces within are pretty complicated. So we have some information here on California Confidentiality of Medical Information Act, or CMIA. It defines who is authorized to release information, prohibits sharing, selling, or other unlawful uses of medical information. There is penalties for negligent or intentional disclosure. Anyone who negligently discloses medical information can be penalized up to $3,000. So again, this is just more information on the CMIA, which is the California piece of HIPAA. So anyone who knowingly or willingly obtains, discloses, or uses medical information in violation of the Act is liable for these fines that are listed here. So there's a first, second, and third violation. There are some, caps on this, but that is written into California code. And then here we have information for folks that do this for financial gain. So taking someone's health information and selling it, using any of this for a profit or personal gain. So again, there's the fees that are associated with those violations. All right. So again, back to, reviewing mandated reporting. And thank you, Eliana, for sharing that information. So mandated reporting is that it's a crime for professionals and folks working with special relationship to children, elderly, or disabled adults to not report any suspected abuse to the proper authorities. Reporting known or suspected abuse to your supervisor or the protective agency immediately as soon as practically possible by telephone, written report within 36 hours of receiving the information concerning the incident. There is some information, California Penal Code 11172, that has information on mandated reporters, what to do if you suspect reported cases of child abuse. And then any person who fails to report an instance of child abuse as required by the Child Abuse Reporting Act is guilty of a misdemeanor with a punishment not to exceed 6 months in jail or a $1,000 fine, or both. Do you have anything to add onto that piece there, Eliana?
Two pieces that I would say from my own practice it can be really scary to think about, like, oh my gosh, a HIPAA violation. I could do it without even intending to do it. And there are all these potential outcomes. And the way that I always went from my own practice is kind of thinking about it in two levels. One is anytime that I share any information about the client, if it's in writing or if it's verbally, who is around me and who could potentially come across it. So it's a really great practice before I would walk away from my desk, if I was going to get some water or the ladies, the restroom or whatever. Always scan my desk. Is there anything that I'm accidentally leaving out here? Is my computer locked? Are the filing cabinets where I hold patient information locked? Those are the places where oftentimes if people run afoul, it's an accident and it happens. The second piece is if I am working in an environment that's really fast-paced, where there's always more need than there are staff to fulfill it, that's where I think, can run into the vulnerability of trying to very quickly pass information between colleagues, and it might be in a hallway or in an elevator, and we're not in a secure environment. And I think especially when we're considering crisis care, that can happen a lot too, because we need to share information quickly. So a really good idea is always, before I'm about to share anything, look around and figure out, is there a private space that I can take this colleague into? And then the second piece that comes to this mandated reporting side is also, if I am about to share information about somebody who is coming from a vulnerable perspective, perhaps they're living with a cognitive disability, perhaps they're an elderly person, or they're a person who has lost the ability to make decisions on their own, maybe because of a serious and persistent mental illness, or because they're children. I'm always wanting to stop and think about autonomy, and again, who I'm disclosing information to, because sometimes our best intention is to share information with a family member, but really we shouldn't be doing that because we don't have the right to do it. So then that takes us over to this mandated reporting side. And just to say that I have frequently called adult protective services and child protective services. Whenever that inkling in my gut was like, I think something might be going on here, I would always rather err on the side of caution and report it and let the reporting agencies do their own determination of whether or not there actually was abuse. That's what they're there for. I am certain that I put in child protective reports that may have at some point come up as not an issue, but I would much rather know that those times where there was an actual safety concern, that it was being addressed by somebody. That comes from my own professional ethics from as a social worker, but also kind of just the way that I move in the world as well. So I'm seeing here in the chat box that Jana has said there's a lot of different people on the call. How can we look up where these codes apply to our specific role and profession? That's a great question, Jana. So what I would say is I'll respond first as a social worker. I would go to the California board that oversees my license as a social worker. So anyone who's on this call who's a licensed clinician of some sort, there is a board that oversees that licensing. As a peer specialist, this is where we go back to those SAMHSA guidelines that were shared out earlier. California, as a state, has just passed SB 803, and there are a variety of pieces of information that are in the works and being adjusted right now. So keep an eye out. Once those new regulations and specifics regarding certification come out from the state, we will be sharing it through the CARE website. So that is a great place to be looking for information as well. So please do. And I see Angela has put into the chat box around a SAMHSA link for recovery support tools peers. Outstanding. Thank you.
And I also added to some of the federal level guidance as well as the California state guidance. And so, I feel I should say, I know when you do a webinar, you do a training and someone just gives you a bunch of websites to go to because they didn't give you the information you needed. HIPAA is such a detailed and nuanced topic. And there's a lot of, even as you saw, the different tiers that are involved. And then there's some specifics in California. And so these are things where, to Jana's question, depending on your role and your, professional role, there are different criteria. There are, some pieces of it that you want to keep in account. So that's why I added those in there, not for anything other than just there's a lot of different resources. And I know folks learn differently and absorb information. So infographics or, a bunch of text. So hopefully those kind of help just, build your library of resources around this topic.
That's a great point. Absolutely. And I think the other piece that I would do in direct practice work is the first thing that I would do when meeting with a client is I would describe what my role was, what they could expect of me, and what would be outside of my role, so they knew what our relationship would be like. And then secondly, I would describe to them where I was a mandated reporter, on what topics, and if a topic came up that I had to do a mandated report on, what those topics would be and how I would engage the client. The third thing that I would do is I would ask them to sign a release of information if there was anyone that they would want me to be able to share information with. And that was a great opportunity to have a conversation also about whoever they never wanted information to be shared with. And that release of information is really important because it's time limited, and clients or people that we work with can always revoke them as well. But that's a big part of how we share information. And then thirdly, if somebody calls me and requests information, maybe it's a lawyer, maybe somebody's involved in a divorce proceedings, or there might be something else going on. It's always okay, no matter what our profession is, to say, thanks, received your request, I'll get back to you. We can feel like even if it's law enforcement, that we need to respond immediately. I don't know a single situation where it wouldn't be okay for us to say, thank you, I'll get back to you, and then consult with a supervisor or consult with our board if we're licensed. Having a little bit of space is okay. And even if they come back and they say that they are going to subpoena us, there's still some space in there to consult with legal if we're at an agency that has the legal consultation available.
So yeah, so there's information here. Obviously, folks, if you have questions and you want to reach out, my email and phone number is there. Our team does a lot of work around peer and family specialist certification. I think some of you that are on this webinar have joined in those other webinars as well. And so you may be familiar with our team. But if there's any additional resources that we can provide, areas of clarity for some of the things that we moved a little quickly through today, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm more than happy to connect you to the folks on our team that do this work on the daily. But just know that, this is, I have been doing this work for a long time, and I've watched the peer, certification conversation, move through for, 10 years. And so this work that we do is really important. The work that you are doing, direct services with families and youth and children and individuals, it's really important and it's so valued. The pieces that we bring into that conversation are, not easily replaced by, a book or a study or a medical piece of it. So the peer component is such a critical part of our work. And when we get into the weeds of some of these policies and procedures, it can be a lot, but it really just strengthens our ability to do this work. And so I just want to thank all of you for the work you're doing as peers, because it's wonderful and it's necessary and it's so important.
I want to second that and also say that I think that many of the values and philosophies and approaches in the peer family and peer specialist movements and professions are really guiding leaders, or should be guiding leaders, for other mental health and behavioral health disciplines. And so, the values of autonomy and personal choice and self-definition and self-determination that so clearly drive peer specialist work, I think really when that modeling is followed by other disciplines, it's better for everybody. And I would say also that on this level, when we think about crisis, so let's say it's a student who's at a school who's having a suicidal crisis, and maybe the teacher hears about it, and then they contact, if the school is lucky enough to have a social worker or counselor, then the social worker or counselor gets involved, or maybe it's the principal or the associate principal, and they call a crisis line, and then a mobile crisis unit shows up. Because that person is under the age of 18, that's one of those places where we might run into a little bit more of a risk around HIPAA or around privacy in general, because our best intentions are in mind of like, oh, I really want to make sure the parents know, or I really want to make sure that this person doesn't fall through the cracks in the system. If they have engaged in some self-injury that needs to receive medical attention and they go to an emergency room, I want to make sure that they have outpatient support when they go home. Those are the places, especially where it's important for us to consider, what do the laws like HIPAA say? What can we disclose or not? And then finally, I would just say, during the COVID-19 pandemic, when so many of us have engaged in telehealth or remote services of some sort or another, there are additional considerations if we're using a platform, whether or not that platform is protecting HIPAA related information. So if we are texting with clients or consumers or people who are receiving services, or if we are in a Zoom platform or what have you, there are considerations we can take to ensure that we're protecting people's privacy. And I would be happy to send this out. We've got a telehealth clinical guidelines and considerations document that we can share out as well. I'm going to stop and just check in the chat box to see if anyone else is. Dennis has just said, when I hear you speak, I hear the passion. Oh, thank you. I know so many of us who do this work, we do it because of the passion. And so many of us come from, whether it's lived experience or we've worked with a lot of clients who have really left an imprint on us. And so it's an honor to be able to work in this field. I see NAMI staff have asked, yes, please send telehealth guides. I will. This is a document that I put together with another project where we actually surveyed different behavioral health professionals who are doing telehealth these days. So we'll share that out. First and foremost, say thank you, Angela. Oh my gosh. This has been a terrific presentation, really complex information, so incredibly important for patient and client safety and for our provider safety and professional protection as well. So thank you. Moving right along here, we have some upcoming learning opportunities. We do hope that you'll join us. We've got the final session by NAMI focusing on self-care and compassion fatigue. This is coming up on April 26th, not to be missed. Oh my gosh, how many of us can really benefit from attention to self-care and compassion fatigue, especially in 2020 and 2021 with so much going on. We're going to screen the film The S Word, which is this powerful documentary about people who have experienced suicide and family members as well. And we situate this film within the crisis continuum of care and share out to the audience a variety of resources like socially distanced crisis services. So we just want to thank everyone for attending. And like Angela said, thank you for the work that you do. You're making a difference in the field, whether it's in California or across the nation. Finally, we do hope you'll stay in contact with us. Please visit our website, send us an email, drop us a phone call. Importantly, on our website, we have information on our social media accounts and our newsletter as well. Thank you all so very much for being here. We do hope to be in contact with you. Thank you for the work that you do.